Terms tonight: agenda, vendetta, power play on the parks issue. How do you respond to that kind of language?
Well, we have people that are passionate about the parks. I just would like to let them know that we're not trying to eliminate and ban and do away with our park system. We're just trying to restructure the management of the parks that allow us to save money at a time that I've got to still find a way to hit $4 million savings by January 1st. So this is just one area we're talking about consolidating, as we've talked about other department consolidations to help us save money in addition to many other factors.
Is there going to be a real savings of $100,000? There seems to be some argument on that issue.
Yeah, no, the simple thing is there's three, right now there's a manager in the street department position, there's two managers in the parks department division. If we merge those two together, we can eliminate one of those manager positions or restructure that and save at least $100,000. And that's simple math. So that's real. And you also heard, half the people here were here to talk about the parks. The other half was here to talk about safety and crime and shootings. And, we don't have enough police officers on the street. So not only am I trying to figure out how to save money to meet our budgetary shortfalls, we're also trying to find a way to put more police officers on the streets. Would we rather have 3 managers in the street and parks department, or 2 managers and a couple of police officers to go out help with safety? The fact of the matter is we have limited resources, and we're doing our best to be able to provide the safety that we have, as well as address the operation of parks. Oh, by the way, I've got a number of people in the street department and a number of people that work in the parks department, and by bringing them together, we'll have more resources, and like economies of scale, we can do more with less. And we can actually, I believe, do a better job in servicing the parks and improve the service on the parks while we're lowering the cost. But what has to happen is we've got to find a way to cut $4 million. This is one proposal of our alternate budget plan, and we'll see what happens.
How about Member Morris's point that he thinks that Canton should be putting on an income tax so that increase so that safety forces have the resources?
You know what? There's a lot of merit to that. But one of the things that when we surveyed this, and we studied for months, as you know, toying with the idea of putting a proposal on the ballot. The one thing that came up over and over again was, have we explored every option? Well, we're doing that now. We're exploring the merging of parks. We explored the ability to potentially drill or sell mineral rights in our property. We're talking about changing the tax credit. We're talking about traffic cameras. We're talking about numerous items and a lot of consolidation and cutbacks. We have cut over $10 million in the past 3.5 years. We've got a whole bunch of proposals on the table for this year. And if we get to the point where we've just decided that these proposals are worse than asking the people for a tax increase, then we'll be ready to go forward on a tax increase. But we were not there yet, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, when we put our plan together. We just weren't ready to go to the public yet. And by the time we get done with all these proposals, perhaps we'll be ready to say, you know what, we're out of options. This is where we got to go.
On the parks issue, it's an open question, isn't it, whether or not council is going to go along with that?
Oh yeah, they have a vote, and we'll see how it plays out. But it's I think that it's a possibility.
Okay, and if that goes down, then that will be one factor in saying, hey, we got to step back and look at an income tax possibility.
Well, we had about 10 items on our alternate plan, 5 of which had to go through council, 5 of which we were doing internally. So it's one of those options. So when we get through we're presenting them all. When we get through that process and they all work their way through the system, we're going to go ahead and retally what went through, where our savings are, what didn't, how much of a gap is there, and what our options are. If the gap is a few $100,000, there may be some other options that we can look at. If the gap is a few $1 million, well, then we're at a point where there's not a whole lot of options left. So until we have allowed all these ideas to work through the system and determine where they fall, we're really not going to know how close or far away we are from our budgetary demands at Canton. We also have 3 unions we're dealing with. We had the 2937 ASPE union. Their contract was approved a couple weeks ago. Tonight, 3449 was just approved both by the members and by council. And we still have the fire negotiations to go on that. Their contract is up by October for the next 12 months. So, we have to go through all that to determine what our real costs are going to be for January. So still quite a few variables out there before we can identify where we're at.
Was the postponed vote on the parks issue tonight because the administration didn't feel like the votes were there to pass?
No, actually, we were planning on a vote up until this afternoon. We just discovered that the amendments that we had asked for hadn't gotten completed yet. The law director still needed a little more time to review some stuff. So we were told by the law department they weren't going to be ready. So it just backs up to the next meeting. So it had nothing to do with any strategy or issues. The one thing I found interesting, though, is, if you don't mind me adding this, and I was debating whether I say it in council or not, but one of the arguments that you hear about is, the park board was created by a vote of the people.
Right.
And so I thought, well, yeah, but that was, some 90 some odd years ago, and, it's a different world today. But I just wanted to point out a couple of things that were happening when they created this park board, if you don't mind.
Right, go right ahead.
First, in the same year that they voted on creating this park board, the first commercial radio broadcast took place. To give you an idea of the time frame. The movies were just starting to get sound, and so motion pictures were now starting to have sound to them. It was changing people's opinions on whether they should watch these talking pictures. Also, Ford's Model A, not the Model T, but the Model A, was still 7 years away from being introduced to the marketplace. And traffic lights at intersection lights were created that year, the same year that they created the park board. In addition to that, the New York Times ran an editorial that said rockets can never fly. That was an editorial in the New York Times, just to give you an idea. And really what's even more intriguing is that women were granted the right to vote later in the year. So when this park board vote took place, women didn't even have the right to vote at the time, and it was decades later before minorities had the opportunity to vote. So when they say this was a vote of the people, it really wasn't the vote of the people we represent. It was the vote of males only from nearly 100 years ago who was allowed to vote. It wasn't women, it wasn't minorities. So it wasn't really a total vote of the people at the time. So I just put that out there as just a little tad tidbit of information to have fun with.
So is the message that the opponents to your recommendation need to get up to date with the times?
Well, I think what's happening is shortly after this was created, a few years after, somewhere in Ohio they created a park and recreation board. And from that point forward, that's how everybody followed suit. And so we were one of the early cities to create a separate rec department, a separate park department. And only a few cities in Ohio did that until they came out and said, hey, these are very like items that should be part of the same. And so over 90%, almost 95, 98% of cities across Ohio have a parks and recreation. And we need to get there. In order for us to do that, we just can't put a vote up to the people to create a park and recreation because we have an existing park board and we have an existing rec board that has a revenue stream, a levy. So what has to happen is that we have to disband the current park board first. Then the recreation department, there's two options. They can, under their current structure, by current authority, they could absorb the responsibilities of the park department under the current rec board. Unfortunately, it doesn't increase the revenue. So they would increase the responsibilities and wouldn't have the revenue to it. So what we were looking at doing is trying to put together a team to put together a platform that says, let's work on the structure of a new park and recreation citywide when it's time for us to go to, and this would be done by a vote of the people, so we would take it to the vote of the people, asking them to support a park and recreation with a levy that would cover both operations. But here's the other twist of the factor. The current recreation department only follows the boundaries of Canton City School. So a third of the city that covers plain local schools or Canton Township down in the quarry, whatever, they don't have a recreation department that overlaps with that. It's only over the Canton City School area. So what we really need is a citywide recreation, a citywide parks and recreation. And so the restructuring of this would not only allow us to merge parks and recreation and be more, like services and be more efficient, effective, and lower our costs at the same time, it will also allow us to create a new structure that will cover the entire city's boundaries. And so it needs to be done. This triggers, by eliminating the park board now. We're not eliminating the parks. And a lot of the comments that you heard tonight made it sound like we were shutting down the parks and we were going to have parks anymore. we're not eliminating the parks. We're not eliminating the resources we have for parks. In fact, we'll have more resources for the parks. I believe that we can actually operate them even better than they're currently being done, just because they're limited resources and we can add more to it. But that's a temporary, because if we put them under our, this is very loud, if we put the parks under the public works, those resources then can be used to help operate the parks. In the meantime, it allows us to start the process of Parks and Recreation. And it forces us, it forces the Recreation Department, Canton City Schools, and the public to say, now it's time to take action. We're either going to do this or we're not. And we can create the plan, put it on the ballot, and let the people vote. If the people choose not to go down the path of a park and recreation, we can always recreate a separate parks department and say, okay, fine, that didn't work. Let's go back to the way it was. I happen to believe that the way it was is not the best way, both with efficiency and effectiveness, and I don't think that the current system is allowing our parks to advance and move forward like it should be. And so this allows us to start changing those things. At the same time, it addresses a financial shortfall, which we're going to be faced with in 2013, and as the economy turns around in 14 and 15, that's the time that we can recreate this new system and address the services. So short term, we save money. Long term, we fix a 90-year-old structure that doesn't work anymore. It was long-winded, I'm sorry.
So I understand.
I was trying to do it without...
So you're optimistic that you think you can convince a majority of council to take the first step to dissolve the...
I think it needs to be done, and here's the problem. I've been trying for 4.5 years. This is my 5th year. When I got here in year 1, we tried to work on merging Parks and Recreation. We had a plan in place, but you've got all these different little kingdoms, these little fiefdoms that people are trying to protect. And so everybody knows that we need to consolidate and downsize government, but we also need to do a better job.
Whether or not you're optimistic that you could convince council to go along with the dissolution.
Well, I think
that's the first step, right?
Exactly. I mean here's what I know. There are a few council members that are on board. There are a few council members that are absolutely not on board, and then there's a few councilmen in the middle that could go either way. So I think it's possible that this could go, and I think it's possible that it could not go. But as you noticed, most of these ideas in the alternative budget, they're all coming right down to the wire, and Alan Schulman has had to be tiebreakers.
Right.
So these are not slam dunks, and in normal times, these are conversations we probably wouldn't be having. But these are not normal times, and so we have to address some of these very difficult situations. And the question is, do we save money in this area, or do I shut down fire stations, or lay off more policemen and firemen, or do we go to the people for tax increase? We're still dealing with financial shortfalls, and we have to be responsible for operating all the departments as best we can, and now it becomes down to priorities of where do we go. I can tell you, and I can tell your listeners, your viewers, that we are absolutely 100% committed to improving our parks and also protecting our parks. It's one of the best-selling features of our community, and I'm the first one to say that, when I moved back to town 8-9 years ago, the parks were the one thing that stood out more than anything, that our parks were fabulous. But our parks today don't look anywhere as good as they did even 6 or 7 years ago. So I think that we're losing ground in our parks, and I want to put that to a stop. I want to turn it around and move our parks forward. I want our parks to be the best in the county, and I want them to be the best in the state. And the path we're on now, they're not going to be, and they certainly are not right now.
What kind of effort have you made to reach out to folks who are protecting their turf?
Well, we for 4 years I've been trying to reach out. I've asked them to give me proposals on upgrades and changes. I mean, we've got, in Monument Park, we've got a pond that has eroded so bad that the park bench that was sitting there on the edge of the park, the water actually is 6-7 feet behind it, and it was literally in the middle of the lake. And so they cut it down so that they got it out of the middle of the lake. But I keep asking them, guys, what do you need for that? How can we help you with that? And I'm not even getting requests for support on these things. So if you look at the creek that runs behind the ponds, it's so clogged up and cluttered with trees and limbs, and it needs cleaned. It needs changed. And I'm not even seeing they're not applying for grants. They're not coming to the city and asking for help. I'm asking them to make proposals to us, and I'm not even hearing from them. So I get that they understand that there's difficulties in finances and what have you. But I just don't think that we're doing as good a job as we can be doing, even with the limited resources. And so by allowing this to transfer over, it allows us to put that under the administration where all of our resources can work. And the funny part about it is, we're responsible to fund it, but we don't have any management oversight. That's a really strange layout. At least the rec department has its own funding. We're not responsible for it, but they have their own funding stream, and so they do it themselves. But the park board structure is city council and administration, we fund it, but we don't have any direct management.
It's an independent body,
It's
right?
an independent body who's not enough to worry about the finances. We do. So it just doesn't make sense. And I get the fact that you want people that are going to be concerned about the beauty and parks and nature and those types of things, but we are too. Just because we have to be responsible for it doesn't mean we don't have those concerns. But what I can tell you is the system is not efficient, it's not effective, and quite frankly, it's not working very well for our community. We need to change that. Whether we do it today under this structure and allow us to save money, or whether we figure out another way to do it, we have to address the parks and recreation in our community because those both could be far, far better than they currently are.